In 1984, I was a combat engineer deployed to the Iran-Iraq War. We were sent on a classified mission to destroy an abandoned Iraqi bunker. What we found in those limestone caves still haunts me today. What we found deep underground wasn't on any military map. Missing soldiers, strange creatures. If you see a black well in any cave system, run for your life. Don't trust your own men. The government classified this encounter for a reason. My entire unit disappeared, and I was the only survivor. Some military secrets should stay buried forever. The year was 1984, and the Iran-Iraq War had turned the Zagros Mountains into a graveyard of abandoned positions. I'm Lieutenant Haddadi, combat engineer with the IRGC, and I'd seen enough bunkers to know they all held secrets, but none like what waited in those limestone caves. The briefing room smelled of stale cigarettes and fear. Colonel Rezaie spread the map across the wooden table, his finger tracing red lines through contested territory. Intelligence suggests the Iraqi bunker complex is abandoned after Operation Ashura, he said, not meeting my eyes. Your job is simple. Plant charges, collapse the tunnels, return to base. I studied the coordinates. The limestone caves stretched for kilometers underground, perfect for hiding weapons, soldiers, or worse. What about civilian populations? I asked, evacuated months ago. The colonel's voice carried an edge. The locals won't even guide our scouts past the ridgeline. Something cold settled in my stomach. Why? Superstitious nonsense. He rolled up the map too quickly. They talk about some serpent's well, fairy tales. But his hands shook as he spoke. 3 reconnaissance teams had gone silent in that sector. Radio contact lost. No bodies recovered. The brass blamed Iraqi patrols, but I'd fought Iraqis for 4 years. They left bodies as warnings. Walking back to the barracks, I touched the letter in my breast pocket. Mariam's last words, written before the 1980 siege. Find something worth dying for. I'd carried those words through every mission since, searching for meaning in this endless war. Tomorrow, I'd take my men into those caves. Something told me I'd finally find what I was looking for. Dawn broke gray and cold over the base. I gathered my men at the equipment shed, watching each face as they loaded gear. Every soldier carried their own ghosts from this war, but I could read the signs, who'd make it through and who wouldn't. Sergeant Parvin handled the explosives with academic precision. Before the war, he'd been an anthropologist, more interested in studying ancient sites than destroying them. His hands never shook, but his eyes held the hollow look of someone who'd seen too much history, buried under rubble. Corporal Saeed couldn't stand still. At 20, he was the youngest, hungry for combat glory and promotion. He cleaned his rifle for the 3rd time, brass cartridges catching the morning light. When do we leave, Lieutenant? Patience. I turned to Medic Jafari, who stood apart from the group. Chemical weapons had hit his previous unit 6 months ago. Since then, he couldn't drink water without his hands trembling. Even morning tea made him sweat. Specialist Nazari finished his prayers and joined us. Revolutionary Guard, hardline believer, saw enemies in every shadow. His faith had kept him alive through 3 years of trench warfare, but it also made him dangerous. Fanatics had their own brand of courage and madness. Load up, I ordered. We're moving out. The truck's engine coughed to life. As we drove toward the mountains, I thought about Mariam again. She'd died during the siege while I was defusing bombs in another sector. Every mission since felt like penance, a search for meaning in sacrifice. The Zagros peaks loomed ahead, limestone cliffs hiding secrets older than our war. I had no idea we were driving towards something that would test every belief we held about reality itself. The bunker entrance yawned like a wound in the limestone cliff face. We'd hiked for 6 hours through terrain that belonged in nightmares, twisted metal from old battles, shell craters filled with stagnant water, and the occasional skull grinning from the rocks. Jesus, Saeed whispered, staring at the concrete mouth carved into the mountain. I clicked on my flashlight. The beam cut through darkness that seemed to swallow the light. Radio check. Static answered me. Jafari's handheld crackled with white noise. Interference from the limestone, Parvin said, but his voice carried doubt. We descended single file, boots echoing in the narrow passage. The air grew thick with a metallic taste that made my mouth water strangely. Behind me, Jafari's breathing turned shallow and quick. 30 meters down, my flashlight beam caught something that made no sense. Carvings covered the walls, serpentine symbols etched deep into the stone alongside modern Iraqi military markings. The serpents seemed to move in the shifting light, their eyes following our progress. These are old, Parvin said, running his fingers along the carved scales. Pre-Islamic, maybe Sassanid period. Iraqis didn't carve these, Nazari muttered. This is devil work. The temperature dropped as we went deeper. My breath began to fog, and the metal taste grew stronger. Compass needles spun wildly, pointing at nothing. Electronic equipment malfunctioned for no reason. Lieutenant, Saeed's voice cracked. How deep does this go? I checked the map. According to intelligence, the bunker should end in 50 meters. We'd already walked twice that distance, and the passage kept descending. The limestone walls pressed closer, forcing us into single file. A sound echoed from the depths, like water dripping, but with a rhythm that seemed almost musical. Drip, drip, drip. What's that? Jafari whispered. The sound grew louder as we moved forward. Not water, something thicker, something that splashed when it hit stone. The passage opened into a cavern that stole my breath. Our flashlights revealed a chamber carved from living rock, its walls covered with dozens of serpent statues. They ranged from small cobras to massive pythons, all coiled in different positions, all watching us with eyes that seemed to reflect our lights. At the center sat a well. The stonework around it was ancient, decorated with the same serpentine carvings we'd seen in the passage. But the water inside was wrong. Black as motor oil, it absorbed our flashlight beams instead of reflecting them. The surface lay perfectly still, like a mirror made of liquid darkness. Mother of God, Parvin breathed. His archaeological training kicked in, excitement replacing fear. This is Shyamaran's well, the serpent queen of Kurdish legend. Legends don't exist, I said, but my voice sounded hollow in the vast space. Look at the carvings, Parvin insisted. She was supposed to be benevolent, granting wisdom to those who sought it, but dangerous to the unworthy. The black water seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. I found myself stepping closer, drawn by something I couldn't name. The metallic taste grew stronger, and I realized it wasn't metallic at all. It was the taste of old blood, of copper pennies, of something that had waited centuries for us to find it. We plant the charges and go, I ordered. This place isn't on any map. But even as I spoke, I couldn't look away from the well. The water was so dark it hurt to stare into it, yet I felt compelled to keep looking. What insights might it offer about the war, about loss, about finding purpose in this endless conflict? Saeed moved toward the well like a sleepwalker. It's beautiful. Stay back, I snapped, but my own feet carried me forward. The water seemed to call without sound, promising answers to questions I'd carried since Miriam's death. Behind me, Jafari whispered prayers in Arabic. His medical training had saved him from many poisons, but this felt different. This felt like something that could poison the soul. Everything changed when Saeed cupped the black water in his hands. "Don't," I started, but he was already drinking. His eyes rolled back, showing only whites. His body went rigid, then began to shake. When he spoke, it wasn't his voice. It was older, deeper, carrying the weight of centuries. "The 3rd Armored Division will attack at dawn," he said in perfect ancient Persian. 47 dead. The lieutenant with the scar will survive, but lose his left arm. Then he collapsed. I caught him as he fell, his body burning with fever. When his eyes opened, they were different. Pupils dilated, reflecting light like an animal's. "Lieutenant," he whispered, "I can see everything. The war, the battles, our deaths. We all die here except what?" I demanded. "Except those who drink." Against every instinct, against military protocol, against common sense, I felt the pull of that black water. It promised answers. It promised understanding. It promised meaning. One by one, my men succumbed. Parvin drank, seeking historical knowledge. His hands shook as he recited lost texts in dead languages, describing battles that happened before Christ was born. His archaeological mind couldn't resist the lure of infinite knowledge. Nazari sought divine guidance and received prophecies that made him weep. He spoke of revolutions betrayed, of faith corrupted, of wars that would consume generations. His prayers turned to desperate bargaining with forces beyond his understanding. I held back, my engineering mind rejecting what I witnessed. But the evidence mounted. Their predictions proved accurate. They knew where Iraqi patrols would be, which routes were mined, when artillery strikes would fall. The water was granting real knowledge, but at a cost I was only beginning to understand. "Lieutenant." Saeed grabbed my arm. His grip was ice cold. "You have to drink. It's the only way to survive what's coming." "What's coming?" "She is." Jafari pressed against the cavern wall, his hydrophobia saving him from the water's call. Through his terrified eyes, I watched my men transform from soldiers into something else. Prophets or madmen, I couldn't tell which. The water in the well began to move, forming small whirlpools that caught our flashlight beams. Something was rising from its depths. The black water erupted. From its depths rose something that shouldn't exist, a woman's torso emerging from coils of scaled flesh. Beautiful and terrible, with eyes like polished obsidian and hair that moved like liquid shadow. Her voice carried the weight of centuries when she spoke. "Welcome, children of war." Shyamaran, the serpent queen of legend, coiled her massive form around the well's edge. Her scales reflected our lights like oil on water, and her smile revealed teeth that were too sharp, too many. "You have traveled far to find wisdom," she said, addressing me directly. "Lieutenant Haddadi, who seeks meaning in sacrifice, who lost his beloved Mariam to this endless conflict." How did she know my name? How did she know about Mariam? "The water is not mere liquid," Shyamaran continued. "It is my venom, carrying memories of every soul who has ever sought truth at my well. Your men have tasted wisdom, but wisdom comes with a price." My transformed soldiers knelt before her, their weapons forgotten. Saeed's eyes had gone completely black. Parvin spoke in tongues I'd never heard. Nazari wept tears of blood. "What price?" I demanded. "Understanding." Her laugh was like breaking glass. "They see the truth of your war, that it is meaningless, that you die for nothing, that your sacrifice serves only those who profit from death. But they also see beyond it, to the patterns that govern all existence." I looked at my men, saw the knowledge burning in their eyes like fever. They were still there, but something else lived in them now. Something ancient and patient and hungry. You offer me the same? I asked. I offer you choice. Drink and understand the true nature of your suffering. Refuse and die ignorant, as your kind always has. The water seemed to pulse with heartbeat rhythm. My men reached toward me with hands that weren't quite steady, pleading with voices that weren't quite their own. Stay with us, Lieutenant, Saeed whispered. See what we see. Know what we know. But Jafari grabbed my arm. Don't listen to them, he hissed. Look at their eyes. They're not your men anymore. I looked. In the depths of their dilated pupils, I saw something moving, swimming, coiling like serpents made of shadow and starlight. The well doesn't grant wisdom, I realized. It collects souls. Shyamaran's smile widened. Clever little engineer. Yes, every person who drinks becomes part of my eternal consciousness. Their individual identities dissolve into my ancient memory. They don't gain wisdom. They become it. Above us, the sound of helicopter rotors echoed through the cave system. Iraqi forces closing in. Time was running out. Subscribe and comment to see how Lieutenant Haddadi faces the Serpent Queen's terrible offer. The helicopter blades grew louder, their sound distorted by the limestone caves into something that resembled screaming. My men, my former men, stood between me and the explosives, their weapons trained on my chest. You don't understand, Saeed said, his voice layered with harmonics that made my teeth ache. If you destroy the well, you destroy the only source of real truth in this war. The only source of truth is getting home alive, I replied, but my hand trembled as I reached for the detonator. Parvin stepped forward, his academic mind now hosting centuries of accumulated knowledge. I can see the Sassanid Empire at its height, the Mongol invasions, the rise and fall of the Safavids. Don't you want to understand the full scope of human history? The black water in the well began to churn. Shyamaran's coils tightened around the stone rim, her obsidian eyes reflecting our lights like fallen stars. Your country calls you heroes, she said, but you are cattle, led to slaughter by men who will never see combat. Drink and transcend your humanity. What happens to the part of us that's still human? I asked. Her smile was patient, ancient. It becomes unnecessary. The helicopter sounds grew closer. Iraqi ground forces would follow. We were trapped between enemy soldiers above and an ancient horror below, with my own men turned against me. Only Jafari remained loyal, his hydrophobia protecting him from the venom's call. He pressed a spare magazine into my hand, his medical training recognizing the signs of mass psychosis or possession. They're not our men anymore, he whispered. Look at how they move. I looked. They moved too fluidly, too gracefully. Their heads turned in perfect unison, tracking sounds I couldn't hear. When they blinked, it was synchronized, like a shared nervous system. The venom doesn't just grant visions, I realized. It creates a hive mind. Shyamaran's laughter echoed through the cavern. Every soul that drinks becomes part of me. Your men see through my eyes now, think with my thoughts. They are eternal, Lieutenant, immortal, free from the burden of individual suffering. The detonator felt heavy in my hand. I'd planted enough C4 to collapse the entire cave system, but triggering it would mean burying my men alive, what was left of them. Footsteps echoed from the passage behind us. Iraqi soldiers following our trail. We were out of time. Choose, Shyamaran commanded. Drink and join your men in eternal wisdom, or die as another forgotten casualty of a meaningless war. I thought of Miriam's letter, her final words, find something worth dying for. Standing in a cursed cave, facing a mythological horror, while my men pleaded for me to surrender my humanity. I finally understood what she meant. Some things were worth dying to stop. I armed the detonator. "Lieutenant?" "No." Saeed lunged forward, but his movements were too predictable now, too mechanical. I sidestepped and shoved him toward the well. "Jafari, run!" I shouted. "Get to the surface!" My medic didn't hesitate. His survival instincts kicked in, and he sprinted toward the passage while I held the detonator high. 30 seconds, I announced. Shyamaran's scream echoed through dimensions I couldn't comprehend. The serpent statues began to bleed real blood, their stone eyes cracking. The black water boiled, releasing vapors that smelled of copper and ancient death. My men advanced, but I was already counting down. 15 seconds. 10. 5. "Find something worth dying for," I whispered, and pressed the button. The world exploded. Limestone and concrete, ancient stone and modern steel, all came down at once. The blast wave hit like a physical blow, throwing me against the cavern wall as centuries of secrets collapsed into rubble. Shyamaran's final scream cut through the roar of falling rock. Not a sound, but a psychic wound that made my brain feel like it was boiling. The serpent statues shattered, their stone fragments mixing with the blood that had been seeping from their eyes. The black water in the well began to drain, sucking downward into cracks that opened in the bedrock. As it disappeared, I heard voices, thousands of them, maybe millions, crying out in languages I didn't recognize. Every soul that had ever drunk from that cursed well, finally released from their eternal prison. My men collapsed as if their strings had been cut. For a moment, I saw recognition in their eyes. Saeed, young and frightened. Parvin, confused and scholarly. Nazari, clutching his prayer beads. Then, the ceiling came down. I should have died with them. Should have been crushed under tons of limestone and concrete. But the explosion had thrown me toward a crack in the cavern wall, a ventilation shaft that led up through the mountain's heart. I climbed through darkness, my hands cut and bleeding, my ears ringing from the blast. Behind me, the mountain settled into silence, burying the well and its guardian under geological weight. When I finally emerged, dawn was breaking over the Zagros peaks. The Iraqi helicopters had fled, their crews probably thinking the explosion was an artillery strike. Jafari was waiting, his medical bag ready, his face pale with shock. "The others?" he asked. I shook my head. "Buried. All of them." He didn't ask about the Serpent Queen or the Black Water or the impossible things we'd witnessed. Some truths are too dangerous to speak aloud. 3 weeks later, I lay in a Tehran military hospital, officially the sole survivor of an Iraqi ambush. Jafari had corroborated our cover story. No mention of serpents or ancient wells, just a demolition mission gone wrong. The war would continue without pause for our small tragedy. The doctors said I was lucky. Concussion, broken ribs, severe lacerations. But I'd live. They couldn't explain the metallic taste in my mouth or the way I sometimes saw things that weren't there. Shadows moving in my peripheral vision, whispers in languages I didn't recognize. Survivor's guilt, the psychiatrist said, common in cases like yours. But late at night, when the hospital grew quiet, I tasted copper on my tongue and remembered things I'd never experienced. Ancient battles fought with bronze weapons, forgotten empires rising and falling like waves, the weight of wisdom that destroys those who carry it. Had I drunk from the well after all? In those final moments before the explosion, had I succumbed to the same temptation that claimed my men? Or was this just my mind's way of processing trauma, creating false memories to fill the gaps? The letter from command arrived on my final day in the hospital. New assignment. They were sending me back to the front lines, to another cave system near the Iraqi border. Intelligence suggested enemy activity in the limestone tunnels. I read the coordinates twice, my hands trembling. The sector was only 50 kilometers from where we'd found Shyamaran's well. The locals, the report noted, refused to guide military units past the ridgeline. They spoke of strange sounds in the night, of water that granted terrible visions to those who drank. I folded the letter and touched my breast pocket, where I still carried Miriam's words. Find something worth dying for. The Serpent Queen might be buried, but her gift and her curse lived on in those who remembered. And I was beginning to suspect that some wells run deeper than we can ever destroy. Subscribe for more untold stories from the shadows of war, and comment below with your thoughts on Lieutenant Haddadi's impossible choice.